Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Transgender Show. My God, it feels like it's been forever, doesn't it? I mean, we took, 1 month off, and it really feels like forever. We're talking tonight with Ruth E, Macy and Courtney Naliboff. And they wrote a book called The Postpartum Body. This book they wrote with the purpose of being inclusive of trans bodies in the conversation, a group that is often overlooked at best, and at worst have their existence erased entirely. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Everybody, welcome to the show, Ruth and Courtney. Hello. Let's start with a quick introduction. So Ruth, you're a pelvic floor therapist, and Courtney, you're a teacher and a writer, and you have both birthed children. Ruth, why don't you talk a little bit more about your experience, and then we'll jump to Courtney.
I'm a trained physical therapist. This will be my 19th year, which seems really weird. And I'm pelvic health trained, so you'll hear people refer to that in different ways. Some therapists who are pelvic health trained might be occupational therapists instead of physical therapists. And so I've been specializing in pelvic health for 12 years.
And what about you, Courtney? What is your what do you do?
I do a lot of things. I am a music and English and theater teacher at a really tiny school on the island that I live on. And I'm a journalist and a writer. And I am a parent. And I definitely had a lot of questions after I had a kid and did not know where to go for them. And so I decided I'd better write about them, and then needed Ruth to help me a lot and to write it with me.
Yeah, so that jumps right into our first question of why was this book important for you to write? And we were talking in the pre-interview, you said expanded on that idea there, basically that you came out of the experience and there wasn't anything for you. So what happened when you were done giving birth and needed some help?
Well, I had read all through my pregnancy. I had read books about being pregnant. And then when I had a baby, I read books about baby sleeping and baby eating and baby brain development and this and that. And I could tell you exactly what size fruit I could compare my fetus to at various months of pregnancy. But then after I had the baby, I couldn't tell you anything about what happened to my body, which was the body that had the fruit baby in it in the first place. And a lot of things happened, relatively speaking. It was not a super traumatic experience, but I did definitely have some physical ramifications afterwards and things that I didn't understand why I was feeling certain ways. And I had been a distance runner before I had a baby, and then I would try to get back to it, and it was very confusing the way that things felt. And Ruth has been my go-to for body questions, way before I got pregnant. Like, I was asking you all kinds of things about weird stuff my body would do. So at a point I was like, well, I want to read a book about what happened to me, because I'm still here and there's this other person now that I have to take care of. But I'm still a person who has questions and feelings and needs. But I couldn't find anything. And this was even, this was 10 years ago. So Instagram wasn't even as sort of a go-to place for me at that point. And there wasn't as much being talked about, even for how little there is now. There was less then. So I just decided at a point that I would need to write a book, because I was a writer and I could write a book and maybe that would help people. And I just started a doc called The Postpartum Body book, and I wrote all my problems down. And then I was like, but I still don't know how to fix them, darn it. And so eventually, Ruth and I would talk and talk and talk. And eventually I was like, look, I have this idea for a book, and I need your help, and I need you to be my co-author. And luckily she said yes, because then it happened. It all kind of happened quickly after that.
Well, and I mentioned that the main reason we have you on is because the focus of the book is not the focus of the book, but one of the focuses that you approached this with was being inclusive of all bodies that give birth or are pregnant, and making sure to include different socioeconomic experiences and other concerns in this. Why was that something that was very important for you to in your approach?
Because I think that when we shift the conversation to the baby or the parent of the baby, we're really erasing the person who had the baby, right? The identity becomes the parent. Well, first of all, not every person who is pregnant into the third trimester then is raising a child. People have pregnancy loss. People have babies and then they have their babies adopted by another family. People are surrogates. And then, too, the language around parenting or the person who gave birth tends to be very M-word centric. And by M-word, Ruth's least favorite word is mama. And so we tend to just really reduce the person who is pregnant down to mama. And it just does not encapsulate every person who's been pregnant. And every person who's been pregnant has experienced dramatic changes in their body.
That certainly get worse if you've been pregnant in your third trimester versus someone whose pregnancy might end for a variety of reasons in the second trimester.
Right.
So for me, I had my kid in the late aughts, and what was happening globally at that time is we were moving away from print literature and figuring out what people could do with the internet, but it was still very new. I don't even think you could get a Facebook page in 2008 unless you were a college student. You had to have that .edu account. I mean, that's how old I am. So I think
I'm older.
What was happening at that point was what was called the mommy wars, because blogging was people's outlet. And so you had a lot of, people who experienced parenthood and mothering and birthing who were writing blogs about their experience, but often centering it from a way of like, I've made this decision that's good for my life, and I would like to tell you why you should make it too. And it really turned into wars about every little way you might parent, with a little bit of memoir-like anecdotes about what they might have experienced and maybe the beginnings of trying to reach out for like, did this happen to anybody else? Did anybody else have this experience? But even at that time, it was very much like you might have your one friend who had a traumatic birth experience, and you might hear their story and be horrified and worried that you're going to go into your labor and delivery with that story, and then come out and maybe you didn't have that experience, or you had a worse experience than your friends and no one to relate it to. So if you fast forward to now, there's so much marketing. The wellness industry is huge. Being an influencer as a parent or a mommy is very big. And I really feel like the way marketing is happening for folks who have had a pregnancy completely erases anyone who is not cisgendered. Mm-hmm. So there are plenty of folks who do not identify as cis female who are capable of birthing. And as soon as your marketing program says, hey, mama, I've got the best postpartum, whatever, read this, buy my $2.99, blah, blah, blah thing, you've now erased someone's entire identity. And that might be the reason they don't access your program. But so many people don't see that because they only center their own lived experience because they like the word mama. And so I just hear that and see that, and in a form of allyship and being aware that I might definitely look and appear to be in the dominant culture. So as you said, cis female hetero, I don't need to only center my identity, especially if we're trying to do something so important and so big as to put research-based, hopefully complete medical information out there for people trying to heal. We wanted to come from a place of, we should make a book that anyone could access and not have that person feel turned away because their identity wasn't represented in the programming.
One of the things that you mentioned was something that I hadn't even really considered about this is in that mommy war culture and what came out of that. Not only is it focused on people with that identity, the mama identity, but it's sort of at the very start of it, kind of eliminates people giving birth who aren't super excited about it.
It encourages sort of the sublimation of your own identity in whatever that means. Like for me, it's my identity as a musician and like a human being who is a separate entity from the person I gave birth to, who's a really cool person and like amazing. And I'm psyched to have them as a child. But me, like the person who I am and the person who everybody who gives birth is just as incredible and important and amazing as the fact that you made a little person. Mm-hmm. And we tend to want to erase that as a society.
Yeah, and reduce them down to just like, yeah, you're just a mom now. Why was the trans community specifically something that you wanted to make sure that you included?
Well, I sort of first became aware of transgestational pregnancy when Tristan Reese's story became sort of widely publicized on the Longest Shortest Time podcast. He wound up fostering and then adopting, I think, his niece and nephew, and then he also then gave birth to a child. And that, I don't even know, this would have been like the 20 teens maybe, and I don't even know if it had crossed my mind at that point that was something that somebody could do or would want to do or any of those things. It wasn't something I'd put together in my brain. It hadn't crossed my radar. And he's very charismatic and a really compelling speaker, and it was a really cool story, and I wound up sort of following him. So the fact that I had this one individual in mind made it very clear that was something we needed to include in the book, because Tristan Reese should be able to access information about his postpartum recovery. But it also, he and then another person we talked to for the book, Regina Tricamo, who's an LCSW who sort of specializes in working with transgestational parents, really helped to reframe the idea that there's really not necessarily a trans-specific postpartum regimen that anybody knows about or would recommend, but there are things that fit under the big umbrella that everybody needs to be thinking about that also pertain maybe in slightly different ways to someone who's transgender. For instance, there's a lot in the book about hormone replacement therapy, but hormone replacement therapy isn't something that's only specific to the transgender community. I was on birth control pills before I got pregnant, and returning to birth control was something that I needed to think about after I was done being pregnant, and that's hormone therapy, right? Like, I am taking hormones to make my body do a certain thing that I wanted to do. So rather than, initially, I think when we were sort of thinking and mapping and planning, we're like, well, maybe like, here's the like box that we put the transgender information in. But they really helped us to reframe the idea of just like, no, like it's all one experience. And there are some things that might be more relevant here or might be more relevant there, but there's nothing that goes in that box. It's everybody. There's also, unfortunately, not a lot of research-based recommendations for certain things, too, like when to return to hormone replacement therapy for specifically for transgender, fill in the blank word. I'm not even sure. It's late at night for me. But, if that's a different consideration, maybe for gender appearance and for all of those things, there's not a really research-based recommendation yet. Mm-hmm. And so in the book, we have a couple different anecdotal examples, because you might want to be using something for wet tissue healing, or you might want to take something to immediately make yourself feel more like yourself. And those are choices that you get to make in an informed way.
Yeah, and I will say, like, we hope that we got it more right than wrong. Not being in the community, I think only the trans community can make that decision for us in the long run. And I think 2020 was that's when we started writing the book. It was like a, pick your lane kind of moment in time. Like, if you're going to be an ally and show up, then be an ally and show up all the way. And, be as inclusive in your life and in your advocacy and in the things that you do in a way that's really visible and not a footnote and not an afterthought and not a, oh yeah, by the way. And we really tried very hard to be well-researched and certainly, hopefully, well-intentioned. It's because, again, even if a person did not have a child, they might want to heal from having been pregnant. And so just thinking about that totally inclusively, if you think about anybody with a capacity for pregnancy and just making sure that anyone picking up that book would be able to read the book and see themselves in the book. I think it's very simplistic, but I had said to you when we were talking about things, if you're going to start something that's never been done before, you can shape the world, right? Like you can shape the world that you live in. And if you can make an inclusive choice because you're creating your own format and your own template, and you're deciding whose stories you want to include and whose stories you want to tell, I think we both just really wanted to be intentional about inclusivity across the board.
Yeah, as far as language throughout the book, but we also had the incredible opportunity to hire an illustrator and to create some medical illustrations that just didn't exist before. Like the publishers, they're kind of like, well, if you can get this as like a stock image, that'll save you some money. That's great. There were not stock images available of the pelvic floor anatomy that we needed. There were not images available representing a diversity of body shapes and sizes and hair and colors and skin colors and all those things that we're trying to convey and capture in the illustrations to make those feel like a lot of people are represented on the page. And I will say, like, this is the first book of its kind of full stop, at least in the United States. And so I hope that there will be more, and I hope that they just keep getting better and better. And I hope that if people are reading the book and finding things where we could have done it better, that we hear about it, because we're going to keep writing about this and talking about this, and we just want to make it the best possible, because every one of you who will be pregnant or has been pregnant deserves this. You deserve it to be as good as it can be, and we want to make it as good as it can be.
How did you approach the language? I know you were talking to a couple folks. Did you have a lot of guidance on the specific language to use?
Well, we talked to Tristan and we talked to Regina. We talked to a couple of providers in Maine who sort of specialize in working with the queer community and birthing. And so we had some really good guidance there. But I will say that, like, up until maybe like the second round of copy editing, we were still trying to make it more and more inclusive. And we went with the recommendations we could find, and then we sort of went back through and we said, oh, here we're saying chest, and here we're saying breast, and here we're saying lactating, and here we're saying breastfeeding, and like, what do we really want to do? And eventually, like we just said, no, we're going for it full force. We are going to refer to genitals, and we're going to refer to chest or top tissue. And we have, I think, headers in some of the chapters sort of explaining the language choice a little bit. But, chest tissue, top tissue, lactation, that includes me and my boobs and breastfeeding, right? Like, I'm not excluded from that, but using the word breastfeeding might exclude somebody. So we just really kept going back and back and back and making it broader and broader.
We also looked to some, trans advocacy groups to see what language they were promoting. I follow a lot of people who work in a birthing community. There's a lot of trans doulas, actually, and trans midwifery. And they're, again, 2020 evolving conversation about what could that language look like to be inclusive right off the bat. And again, not a footnote, not an afterthought. And so it was really looking around, like, what appears to be in major trans literature, or people who are really representing a trans birthing community or queer birthing community, what is the language that's being used? So kind of asking around some people in my pelvic health community, and then just looking up resources. So again, we hope we got it more right than wrong. But I think, again, it's evolving. So help around birth is evolving very rapidly. What has been available for the last 10 years is dramatically different. And so I think as that community evolves rapidly, there's also people who are pushing for representation, pushing for better healthcare metrics across the board. Because as you may know, our United States maternal mortality rate is high, and there's just horror stories about how people are harmed, particularly in a marginalized identity across the United States. So I think that is an evolving conversation that maybe isn't even settled within people's particular community, but there are some loud voices that are pushing and educating and trying to create spaces where people like myself, who I'm in a small community in Maine. Maine is not very diverse. And so I might not see as many diverse folks, but I might see one person. And if I can be a safe advocate for that one person, that's who I am as a provider. I want to be as educated as possible so that person can feel safe with me and being their full identity.
Just as a school teacher too, I'm in a tiny public school. We're on an island, but even within that, I've encountered people from all walks of life in an unexpected and amazing way. And I've tried to make my presence at the school one of allyship and advocacy, because again, if it's one kid, it's one kid, but that one kid deserves the most amazing supported school experience that they can have too. And we don't get as many opportunities to practice that as we might in a larger community, but every single one matters just as much.
Well, and just like I was talking about this culture where intention seems to matter so little to folks, and what you actually did or said, or how you said something one time, one sentence is what people focus on. I feel like there's also this massive pushback right now across the country with a certain contingent where they feel that inclusive language is somehow exclusive of them, like is somehow excluding them. And, I'm sure there's really nothing y'all can do about that. And the right thing to do is to have the inclusive language, but I hope that you don't have too much backlash in it because you're so inclusive.
I think that we will. I think that some turfy corner of the internet is probably going to come for us in some way, but okay, whatever. That stinks for them. The book is for them too. It's not for them because it's for somebody else too. And that's just a problem that we can't solve for them. We can just lay it out on the table and say, this is for everybody. It's your postpartum body. If you are postpartum, it's for you and your body, whoever you are. And then people can kind of pick and choose what they want to do with it. It's fine. If that's how they're going to feel about it, they're going to miss out on an incredible opportunity.
Well, I think if you read the book, we have a little comment in there about it's like a choose your language, so there's multiple aspects of language, choose your own adventure. And I hope more people choose to be the protagonist with the information that we've presented, but certainly some folks may get a thrill out of being the antagonist. And I would say, because there's not enough of post-birth education in general, that would make me sad if they chose not to participate in caring for themselves or educating themselves. But because there's such a dearth of information, maybe they can write more and push for more research and more advocacy, because that's kind of what antagonistic behavior does. It pushes advocates to say, yep, no, we're digging deeper. We're going to push this up even higher. And so even in a way, if people feel antagonistic about the book, which certainly is not our intent at all, that's their choice. And at the same time, it will probably help promote better research for everyone in the long run and better information. So if our long-term goal is education advocacy for all people who have the capacity for birth and to be able to heal afterwards, we're still going to accomplish that if people don't like that we represented all identities.
Yep.
Well, and I had the thought early on in the transverse of, hey, if we could just piss off the right people, we might get a lot of good publicity.
Absolutely. I'm hoping that J.K. Rowling hate tweets our book, because what could be better than that?
Ruth, I kind of wanted to specifically in the medical field, have you address the sort of systemic misogyny that has been there, at least historically?
So I feel like I need to mention the husband stitch to start this conversation.
Oh, ew. Okay.
a lot of people feel, if you look at the history of gynecology in general, which really started as just obstetrics because we started with only caring for people with vulvas and vaginas from a sense of their capacity to birth. And only over time, with increased care needs and acknowledgement of increased care needs, have we expanded that further to full pelvic health services, vulvovaginal care, beyond reproductive care into sexual care, cancer prevention. So just obstetrics and gynecology itself is very tricky. In the United States and sort of modern medicine, it was very in vogue for folks to be anesthetized at the time of their birth, hospitalized for a long period of time. The obstetrician, who is usually a male, would deliver the baby in whatever way they saw fit, making the birthing person completely not engaged in the process at all. They were anesthetized. And it was a typical practice to do an episiotomy, which is a surgical incision in the perineum, which is like the bottom of the vaginal canal. And as a part of that, in order to make the husband happy, the obstetrician would add an extra stitch to sew up the bottom of the vaginal opening just a little tight. And so that developed the nomenclature, the husband stitch, because it was not about the birthing person's comfort or healing or hemostasis of the wound of the episiotomy or the fact that they needed it or they tore. It was 100% narrow vagina equals male pleasure. So we can start with that level of misogyny. That is true and does exist. And there's lots of evidence that it was a normalized, regular practice.
People still joke about it all the time, though. Like, it still is like, oh, get him to put an extra stitch in there. It's so awful. It's so gross.
So, I mean, I think, again, thinking about the birthing community, women are doctors now. There is a much higher prevalence. So in the hospital healthcare system that I work in my specific hospital, there's only women GYNs and only women certified nurse midwives that are participating in birthing care. And so I know a lot of my patients now are very explicit about saying, I do not want to work with a male practitioner. I do not trust a male practitioner. I do not think they have my best interests at heart. Which I think is very great that people feel good they can advocate for that and have freedom of choice. Something we say in the book is it can be very important from a safety standpoint, especially looking at maternal mortality rates again, to have a provider that has some part of your lived identity because they are more likely to be compassionate to you.
In a book this technical, there's a lot to cover. There's a lot to research and all of that. And in a project like that, there's sort of no way to get it all right. Can you talk a little bit about that, about kind of pushing through any fears or second guessing you might have had to actually putting out a book like this?
I mean, I am notorious for just kind of like stating an intention and then like shamelessly, rapidly making it happen. It's one of my favorite things about myself. So I knew that I needed help, but I also knew that it was too important not to let happen. And whether or not we were the exact right two people in the entire world to write the book before we started writing it doesn't matter because we're the two people who wrote the book. And we wrote it in with all of the we've done hundreds of hours of interviews, anecdotal interviews with people who have had babies and interviews with experts in the field who had expertise that we didn't have, or people who we wanted to talk to sort of confirm some things that we thought that we knew. But we also are pretty explicit in the book that there are places where there isn't a lot of research, and this actually goes right back to the question you asked about medical misogyny. This isn't a place where research dollars are currently being spent. And so there are a lot of places where, we've got the best practice of the time, and we've got anecdotal information, we've got Ruth's lived experience as a practitioner, but there's not necessarily a big, double-blind, peer-reviewed study that we can reference for every single thing we're trying to hit in the book. So it's my sincere hope that in the future, we'll learn some things that we didn't know when we were writing it, or we'll learn that something that we thought anecdotally was true, that there's some big study, and then we find out, oh, actually, this is what's happening. Because if people read this book and they're like, now, wait a minute, I'm not sure about this, and then research dollars get spent on it, like, hooray. I mean, that would be absolutely incredible. Like, we sincerely hope that this book's existence will start to shift perspective towards the person who was pregnant. And I think that is going to help us when we have conversations about reproductive justice too, because, and I think about this a lot, and I think that, as time sort of marched on and things got scarier and scarier as far as access to abortion and birth control and now IVF and this and that, like, is that the part of the conversation that nobody yet has the guts to say in a public forum is, hey, it's not like you're just pregnant and then you're not pregnant anymore, and it's like you've never been pregnant and you can just, put the baby in for adoption or whatever, and it's like nothing ever happened. No, big things happened that might be terrible and life-altering and, traumatic, or at, best case scenario, just kind of annoying. But something happened to the body of the person who was pregnant, and no one wants to acknowledge that because it's not super convenient in a lot of conversations. If we're trying to talk about, like, just go through like 9 months of pregnancy and move all your organs around and like spread your abdominal muscles apart. And then when you go running, you're going to pee, but that's fine because you had the baby. Good for you, right? So, the existence of this book was more important to me than anything we could have bumped up against along the way. Like, I just passionately have believed in its existence before I knew how to make it happen. And through the whole process, there was never any point where I was like, oh no, like all the people we're talking to feel so comfortable and confident about the experience that they had. Nobody needs this. Everybody was like, oh my gosh, like, where was this book? I wish I had this book. Can I have this book now? What do you mean I could just pick it up and read it and know all the things? It needed to exist. Like, I wanted to go buy it and I couldn't go buy it. And so we had to make it happen. And I think that anybody that wants to do something should just say, like, okay, I'm just going to do this thing and I'm going to bump up against it and we're going to see what happens. And, there were times where it felt very big, like just incredibly huge, this bulk of information we were trying to get down, and thinking about the word count and the page count and the illustrations and like, how can we make it something you can hold in your hand, maybe with one hand, maybe while you're like pumping or whatever.
What's the flippability?
Yeah, like, can you just, it's not coming out in hardcover because no one wants to like fall asleep reading it and hit themselves in the face with like a hardcover version of our book. Because you catch those little cat naps in the postpartum period.
I would also say I have a sticker on the back of my car that is a quote directly from Courtney, and it says, confident, sloppy, and loud.
Oh yeah, that's my band's motto.
That's Courtney's band's motto. And I'm a big fan of Carrie Fisher, and she said something like, be terrified and do it anyway. And I think, one of the things that maybe people forget about science, and maybe particularly medical science, is that we progress when scientists deeply disagree. So again, if the book is like falling short of what some people's ideals are, I mean, there are some things in there that I'm sure people are going to be like, I don't agree with this at all. And I think when you hear that, there are people who want to have a really good faith conversation about like, how did you land here? I don't even know how many citations we have, Courtney, like probably over 300. It's a lot. There's so many citations. And that even with all those citations, it's incomplete. It's incomplete medical science. It's understudied. uh, as you know, most trans experiences are understudied, but what have we gotten out of trans surgery? I gave a sex health talk for people with vulvas and vaginas last month, and one of the things I was saying is like, do you have any idea how many nerve endings the clitoris has? And people are always like, oh, 8,000. I'm like, nope, that's from the bovine study meeting cows. There's actually over 10,000, and we now know we're not actually fully done mapping them. And the only reason that we know that for people with vulvas and vaginas is because of trans affirming surgeries. So when people disagree and we ask better questions and we represent more people, everybody wins. And even if somebody else wants to write like a clapback book, good, go represent more people. Let's have a more robust conversation. Let's help as many people as possible. So I will say I can fake being confident pretty well. I think Courtney is more actually confident than I am. So I had a lot of like mini panic attacks and I needed a lot of hand holding. And our agent, Anna, is amazing at being able to talk me down and make me feel like a normal human. And again, every moment that I had where I was like, who am I? I'm not like some mega star in the pelvic health community. I'm like a classic writer type. I'm an introvert. I can give some talks, but then I want to go away and go home and never be seen again. I do not want my face on a billboard. Like I literally would have had a cabin in the woods with a hot tub to write this book and just get it out there, but that's not how people hear about books anymore. So thank you for being our first interview in a safe place for us to like really get the word out. It was very exciting that you were our first interview about the book in this way. So I'm hoping faking confidence, but also representing like in science, disagreements help us. So if that's what lands from the book, we tried. And if other people want to try, it's only going to make the conversations and therefore the healthcare for birthing people better.
I love that win-win situation for you. But either way, you've done something great for the community. You get it out there and it helps a ton of people and you got it all right. Or there are things you didn't get right, or you didn't get most of it right, whatever. And it helps the community because those people push back, and they're like, well, if they did this and they got all this wrong, like I have to write my book. I have to do my research. And I think that's wonderful for you, that either way you win.
Either way we win, and either way, hopefully we really are just making people take a look at people who were pregnant and say, like, you are still a person and you still have a body, and your body is important, and your body should feel and function the way you hope it does. And, how can you get back there? No matter where you live or how much money you make or what color you are or what gender you are, like, everyone should have that opportunity.
On the topic of what you've learned or what kind of feedback, you get from this, is there anything that you have learned since you put down your pencils on this book or sent it to print?
I mean, no new research has been forthcoming, I will say. Like, I learned so much writing the book, for me coming in sort of as the layperson voice. Here's my anecdotal experience and here are the questions I had that we can answer for you. Like, I learned so much and it really helped to reframe my thinking, around things that are just sort of rigorously marketed at us as, pathological. And I really Ruth helped me towards this really big epiphany about diastasis recti, which is like the separation of your abdominal muscles, and that it is not always going to cause a problem. It might not close. You might not always close that gap back to where it was. And that might not always be a problem. And for me, it was like, oh, if it's not closed, it's this, and that. And like, there's a lot now, it's easy to find things that talk about that, or my least favorite phrase on the entire planet, which is mummy tummy. No to that. No to mummy tummy. But there was like an NPR piece about it and these exercises and da. And I'm a big fan of the even though the name isn't great, and they've sort of acknowledged that and then didn't change it, but the Mama Strong exercise program, which talks a lot about that. But for me, I had pathologized it in my mind just because of the things I was exposed to. And Ruth really helped me to reframe that. And that was an epiphany that I sort of had along the way. But I would
Courtney,
say
you're bringing up the most controversial thing in the book with diastasis recti right there.
that it's not always pathological.
Yeah, so actually this is a big argument that's happening in pelvic health right now. And I really both sides it in the book. I really did. Because I think there's some people with diastasis recti, because how do we measure that? It's more than a 2 centimeter separation of the two, think about like your six-pack ab muscles. It's a 2 centimeter separation or more than that. And so there's some really passionate, very, very smart pelvic health therapists who are like, yeah, does the distance matter? Is the depth worse? What are you doing with that separation? Is it protecting your organs? And so there's just, again, like robust arguments happening, which is awesome because it's furthering this idea that we can get to a place where we can really study and look and learn about who is having prolapse or leakage or incontinence or back pain, which is what most people think happens with diastasis recti, except for the medical research that says, yeah, most people don't have those things from diastasis, or people with diastasis don't have those symptoms at all. So I think it's coming back to medicine as a practice. It's an imperfect science. We should be learning and asking questions of each other all the time. So, like that is one of those things that I think people are going to come at us and be like, are you sure? Who are you?
I've even seen Sarah Duvall's even changed some of her recommendations though around loading a diastasis, which has been really interesting to see, just like as what I've learned has evolved. It's been really, really cool.
Yeah, it used to be the big bad, and now it's like, and I would say Courtney's feeling about it sort of highlights where we are culturally about health, which is a much larger concern that I have. So Courtney is medical adjacent, very smart, very intelligent, definitely as a primary research. I want to know the things function, and is able to do that for herself very well. And so she represents a lot of the population right now who really want to take their health and wellness in their hands and do as much as they can on their own, but cannot really make sense or conceptualize some nebulous medical things. And so there's a lot of people who feel gaslit by physicians when they go in and they say, oh, you have a diastasis. Your insurance isn't going to cover anything for it. It's just a cosmetic procedure. Like, live with it. Go do some crunches. And then they're going to go home and cry and say that their doctor treated them badly. And maybe bedside manner, it's worth having a discussion about that. It's worth having a discussion about delivery and whether or not your healthcare provider makes you feel seen. But at the end of the day, that doctor didn't say the wrong thing. That's still largely where medicine is landing, is it is a medical procedure. And to get it fixed would be an out-of-pocket plastic surgery expense. And it's not considered something that needs to be changed still in medicine. Will it still be that way in 10 years? Probably not, because they're researching it more, and it's not something we researched before. And so we're always working. There's a saying in medicine about turning the barge.
It takes 5 years.
To 8, 5 to 8. It takes 12 years for a person entering medical school right now. That they should exit in 12 years. So somebody who's interested because of this information may start changing their field in 12 years, but it's very tricky.
Do you all have any kind of feedback? I know, Courtney, you said anecdotally that there are lots of people that want this book now, but have you been able to show it to any people and get some real meaningful feedback yet?
We've been really lucky to have a couple early readers, many of whom have written books in similar field, sort of, about pregnancy or about women's health or about misogyny in healthcare. And it's been really positive, and it's just been such a treat to have people read it and respond to it in that way. And to hear them say that it feels inclusive and that it feels comprehensive and that it feels friendly to read, which is really nice because it is a lot of information. Like, we want you to have information, but we wanted to make it accessible and palatable and conversational and all those things. And it's feeling like we maybe have achieved those goals from the early readers, which just is an incredible feeling. It's just, yeah, it's something to celebrate for sure.
It's a stretch for us to talk about a book about pregnancy here on this show. Mm-hmm. And I love that you have focused on being inclusive of all experiences and put such a big focus on trans experiences, because again, not only are we often ignored, we're very often erased. And sort of aggressively or even violently so. And so it's just really important. And I'm really glad that we were able to have you on and make a good through line of like why it's important to have you on the Transgender Show.
I really appreciate the opportunity.
So much. Yeah. And I think it might be something bigger as well. Like, in a person's trans identity, do they maybe want to embrace parenthood? And then what options are available to you? And, one of the things that came through when we spoke with Tristan was they had a birth option available to them in their couplehood, even though they had already adopted too. In the adopting too, they realized they wanted to look further into what their options were. Being a trans person is pretty complex. So one of the things that could even come up from you agreeing to have us is people being to evaluate what kind of family they might want to have in the future and whether or not this is something that they want to explore. So again, having someone very visible like Tristan Reese might maybe help people, like if they decide maybe people do want to be parents and aren't sure if they can receive healthcare. One of the anecdotes that Tristan told us about his experience was he went to a physician who was like, "Can you even get pregnant?" And they were like, "Yeah." And Tristan is the child of a physical therapist, mom, and a doctor. And they were like, "Yeah, so I'm going to go see somebody else who asked better questions."
and knows what they're talking about. Yeah.
Mm. So as you well know, there will probably be no end to having to advocate to get medical support in your trans identity. But family planning is so important, so personal to so many people. And so I hope if it is something that people have played around with, whether or not it feels right to them, knowing that there are other people living this experience have found their way through it while maintaining their identity, maybe that is going to feel good to them and be really helpful to them and how they want to live their life or family plan.
Well, and I just heard so many horror stories of trans people that don't go and seek care, even just for the sort of the maintenance stuff, let's say, because of, having a beard and going in and waiting for your OBGYN appointment in a lobby with cis women. Experiences like that make it very embarrassing and tough for folks. And I'm hoping that books like this with a focus on inclusion, I'm hoping that the TERFs find you and bring that to the forefront, and people know that about this book and know that it is something that they can find themselves in, and they can find access to this. And again, that representation, that it's possible to have a kid. I can, fulfill my dream and bear a child and actually experience this. So thank you so much for writing this book and for everything that you do.
It was so nice to meet you, Emily. Thanks for having us on.